Welcome to the 8th part of Harald Finehair's saga. Today I'm out by Grønhøy, it's called in Danish. The green mound here behind me. This is way before Viking times. This is from 3500. It's dated to 3500 before Christ. So 5,500 years old. It's a quite large megalithic burial mound, and was also reused as a burial mound in later times. As far as I remember, there's some 2400 BC. There are also some findings. There are no burial finds from the original age, only finds of pottery. So if it was originally a burial mound, that's speculation. Anyway, I thought it was a nice setting. I was passing by, so a nice setting for one of our episodes. Today is the 8th part of King Harald Finehair's saga, and we'll be reading about the farmer Åge, who gives the king a feast, and his the murder of Åge. Åge gives the king a feast and his murder. King Harald set his travels east over Eidskog and arrived in Värmland and had a feast prepared for him there. And, both Eidskog and Värmland are called the same today. Eidskog is in southeast Norway, and Värmland is in western Sweden, southwest Sweden. There was a man called Åge. He was the most powerful farmer in Värmland, very rich and old of age. He sent men to King Harald and invited him to visit him for a feast. The king agreed to come on the proposed date. Åge also invited King Eirik to the feast, the Swedish king, and suggested the same day. Åge had a magnificent feasting hall that was old, so he had a new hall built just as great, leaving nothing out. This hall was covered in new decorations, while the old hall kept the old decorations. When the kings arrived at the feast, King Eirik was brought into the old hall, while King Harald and his men were brought into the new hall. The table setting was fixed thus, that King Eirik and his men had the old cups and horns, and they were nicely adorned, while King Harald and his men all had new cups and horns adorned in gold, and they were all with carvings and shining. The drink for both parties was of the highest quality. Åge the farmer had previously been Halfdan the blacksmith. When the day arrived that the visit was over, the kings started preparing for departure. The horses were readied. Åge then went up to King Harald, leading his 12 winters-old son with him. He was called Ubbe. Åge said, "If you will, Lord, take my friendship in sight of my good will, as I have shown you here in my home, and then repay my son for this, as I give him to your service." The king thanked him with many fair words for how he had received them, and promised to hold him as a dear friend. Åge then had great gifts brought out that he gave to the king. After that, Åge went to the Svea king, the Swedish king, King Eirik the Svea. Eirik was dressed up and ready for departure, but he was in a lousy mood. Åge had good gifts brought to him. The king didn't answer much, but mounted his horse. Åge followed him down the road and spoke with him. There was a forest close to the farm, and the road went into it. When Åge came into the forest, the king asked him, "Why did you divide the feast between us and King Harald so? He was always given the better part, and all the while you know that you are my man." "I thought," said Åge, "that you, my king, and your men were not treated worse in this feast. And when you were given the older tableware to drink off, it was on the basis that you are now old. while King Harald is in the bloom of his age. And that is why he was given the new tableware. But now that you reminded me that I would be your man, then let me tell you that you are no less my man. The king then abruptly drew his sword and gave him bane strike and promptly rode off. I'm translating banehugg directly because it's a quite special word with special meanings. It's not like just a simple strike. So it's a death strike. So I translate it quite literally, bane strike. When King Harald was ready to mount his horse, he asked that Åge, farmer, be called to him. When his men went out to find him, some of them came across the place where King Eirik had rode off and found Åge dead there. They then returned to the king. When he heard this, he shouted to his men that they should avenge Åge, farmer. The king then rode off, following the tracks of King Eirik until they were in sight of each other. They both then rode everything they could until King Eirik reached the forest that separates Gautland and Värmland. At that point, King Harald turned back to Värmland, conquered that country, and killed every man of King Eirik he met on his way. King Harald returned to Romerike later during the winter and stayed there for a while. This is, for me, quite a strong anecdote, and it shows some of the sentiment of the pride that was expected among people, and also it hints at kind of the political structures of the time. So Åge the farmer, he's caught between a rock and a hard place. He's a powerful man in an area that is traditionally, at least for the last couple of hundred years, been contested between kings to the east and kings to the west. So the Swedish kings and the Norwegian kings. And now there's a unified king on the west side who's growing in power. So he's caught between a rock and a hard place and has to choose a side. When he gives his son away in the protection of King Harald, and already the way he sets the tables is quite clearly he has chosen sides, and he knows that he must die because he is the Swedish king's man, but goes back to the Norwegian side, which he held previously under Halfdan the Black. And the way he dies is, he says this, veiled but not so veiled, when the king says the Swedish king says he's his man, and he says that if it is so, then the Swedish king is also his man. So he pulls the king's status down to his, thereby telling very clearly that he only acknowledges King Harald as his king. And the Swedish king has to kill him for this, which he does. And in the tradition in Sweden and also in Norway, before later times when it came under Denmark, and Denmark gradually became more of what they called enevelde. It means like a tyranny under the monarch. But before that, if a king was to be accepted in Norway and Sweden, and especially in Sweden, they had to be accepted at the tings. So you'll see in the sagas later, many times they have to go to the different main tings in Norway and be accepted by the locals before they can be called king. Unless they conquer them, like King Harald Finehair is doing by violence. But usually it's granted by the tings. And especially so later in Sweden, where you have the folkkung tradition, like the folk king. So if the king wasn't accepted by the tings, he wasn't a legitimate king. So kind of a democratic element to it. Which means that the king, if the nobleman isn't the king, isn't your king, he's at your level. Of course, with different social strata differences. But in principle, he's at your level. And that's what Åge is saying here. And I think it's a nice anecdote, and probably something like this happened, and that's why it's included. Anyway, that was the story in King Harald Finehair's saga about Åge the farmer. If you have any comments or feedback, please leave them in the comments, and I'll get back to them. And also any suggestions. And again, finally, I just want to remind, I have the genealogy. There's a link in the description below where I'm keeping track of all names in Heimskringla, and thereby also this saga, and their genealogy and marriages and relationships. So it's easier to see the power relations between families, because they go very deep over time. Like, for example, when the Swedish king and the Danish king and the Norwegian king talk about, like Eirik King previously here in the saga, this saga says he's going to conquer the parts of Norway that Ragnar Lodbrok and Sigurd Ring previously held. It's because he says this because way back he is of their lineage, and thereby he's both setting his intention, but also his lineage, and is indirectly saying he has a claim to those lands. The only problem here is King Harald also has a hereditary claim to these lands through Olaf Tretelja, Olaf Treefeller, and Halfdan Kvitbein, Halfdan Whiteleg. So that's that for this time. I hope you join me for another video.